Hello anchor experts, it's Steve with SV PanoPay. You may recall from my most recent video that I made a hypothesis. I stated that perhaps small anchors just don't work as well as larger versions of the same model anchor. Well, here we have a new anchor to test. This is a Sarca XL number 1. It's the smallest XL that they make. It weighs 17 pounds. And well, here we are. We're going to test it and see if my theory is true, or maybe how true it was. So we've already watched the anchor set initially, and here is a first reset. That's where I drive the boat up and overhead and test how well the anchor can pivot and or release and reset. We are in my standard sandy mud bottom. We've got 3.5 to 1 scope out. The rode is a combination of 12 feet of 5/16 chain, and the rope portion is 9/16 nylon. After each one of these resets, I give about 190 pounds of pull to sort of make sure the anchor is fully engaged. So far, this anchor is performing just great. Sometimes it releases completely from the seabed. Other times it remains engaged. But I'll say that this particular model anchor, these XL anchors, they have a tendency to release from the seabed at a higher frequency that some other anchors do. You would prefer to see the anchor stay engaged and just have it rotate, but at least for this seabed that I'm testing, it doesn't seem to matter. It always resets. By comparison, that 13-pound Mantis anchor, after a few of the resets, it seemed to get fouled with seabed and had some trouble. Anchor drug a little bit farther this time, but notice that the tether lines are not leading to the middle of the anchor shank. They're actually caught underneath one of the flukes. I think it might be affecting its resetting and diving into the seabed a little bit, but in any event, it did get the job done and stop the boat. Tether's straightened out now. Now we're back into normal, and anchor is reset right away. I'll note that with the other smaller anchors that I tested, I really needed to use 5 to 1 scope to get them to reset reliably. This anchor is doing real well though at 3.5 to 1 scope, so I'm not going to test it at 5 to 1 scope for these resets. I end up using a little more scope later for my deep set test, which you'll see here in a minute. So I got the anchor all cleaned off, and this is that so-called deep set test that I do. There's no back and forth reset jazz. I just pull it in one direction. So here's the initial set. It's just the boat's just idling along. I've recently tested the thrust or the pull of this boat connected to the dock. So with that bollard pull information, we can now get an idea of the holding power of these anchors. I usually state the RPM I'm pulling on, but I'm going to change that. I'm now just going to talk about pounds of pull. So right off the bat here, the first increase in power is 190 pounds. I'm just up there counting to 30 as I do this, looking for a 30-second pull each time. I'd really like to edit this video and make it shorter for you, but I think for this test it's best to just let the camera roll. That way you can see the anchor moving. It may be moving incrementally, and that's pretty important. People want to know if their anchors are inching along as the wind increases. So speaking of increase, I've just increased the power to 380 pounds of thrust. Ideally, we would like to see this anchor stopped moving by now and diving into the seabed and disappearing. Power's now at 565 pounds. Looks to me like the top of the shank is about even with the seabed surface. Looks like there's a little evidence of seabed being forced up. I just saw a little clump fall away. A little bit of heaping going on. It's normally not a good sign. And sure enough, the anchor releases. Power's been reduced. I'm not going to call that a failure. For a 17-pound anchor to hold 500 pounds or so at 3.5 to 1 scope is pretty impressive. So I could tell the anchor had re-engaged, so I've restarted the test. I'm at 380 pounds of thrust now. Now we're at 565 pounds of thrust. This was the same thrust that it pulled out the last time. And the fact that the anchor is performing similarly tells me that it's not clogging. The performance is very stable. It works the same.
Deep set, 5 to 1 scope.
But I do think this anchor has more potential, so I've increased the scope up to 5 to 1. Initial idle set. Power's up to 190 pounds of thrust. Recall from the Mantis, 13-pound Mantis video, it released at 380 pounds of thrust at this same scope, same seabed, same road. Power's up to 380 pounds of thrust. This is about the point of the video where the Mantis released. And I'll mention that when it did release in this straight line pull, it didn't want to reset fully. It provided a little bit more holding power, but at that point the damage was done. It really wasn't as effective. Now I'm up to 765 pounds of thrust. The anchor's completely disappeared. Now at these high thrust settings, the boat begins to move sideways due to prop walk. It's a new configuration for me. I've never pulled this hard with this boat before, but what it means is that the boat's moving to starboard, and it's going to cause the direction of pull to change. And that's unacceptable. This is supposed to be a straight line pull. So I've stopped the test temporarily, and I'm repositioning boat to line up with the original setting direction. Okay, I've restarted the test here, and it's at time for the max pull. It's 820 pounds. It's full throttle. It's only about 3,100 RPM, 3,150 on a high RPM engine, but that's what we get, 820 pounds. Boat's moving sideways at nearly 2 knots at this point. I'm gonna try my best to try to figure out a way to prevent that for future tests, but for now that's what we've got. Now this I found very fascinating. There's no way I could pull this anchor out by hand. I tried and I couldn't make it budge. I had to attach the anchor to the center line of the boat. I tried it on the side of the boat and almost tipped the boat over. Well, okay, the boat didn't almost tip over, but it was certainly alarming. But anyway, it took a surprising amount of power to get that anchor to release, even with a road that was vertical. So that was very, very impressive. 17-pound anchor, holding 820 pounds of thrust and diving into the seabed. Seemed to me it would hold quite a bit more. How much? Don't know. Maybe I'll need to test it with a bigger boat. So here now I've moved over to my sand and gravel location. This is only a couple miles away, but there's lots of current here, and it The current keeps the fine material out of the seabed, so we just have loose sand, gravel, seashells, and quite a bit of weed. So here's the initial set and application of 190 pounds of thrust. This one I'm just doing some resetting so I don't give it the full power setting. First reset was fair. You might hear some clicking and clunking. That's stones, small stones in the seabed that the anchor runs into. Now, second reset, something happens that I haven't seen before. I've got the boat going pretty fast. It's at least 3.5 knots, and I'm traveling into a couple knots of current. So the road is seeing maybe 5 or 6 knots, and I believe dynamic pressure of the water pushing on the rope portion of the road has lifted the shank of the anchor, and it totally prevented it from resetting. And in the process of this lengthy drag, it collected a bunch of seaweed and stuff. And I've done enough testing at this site to now think that the resets at high speed it's kind of a moot point. The anchors frequently collect a lot of debris. The seaweed here is often stick-like. Anyway, I pulled it a few more times. I'm not going to show you, but it was clearly fouled and no longer usable. And you see the big clump of seaweed and sticks and rocks there. So rather than retest that at 5:1 scope, I thought I could prove to myself how this performs here at keeping it at 3.5:1 scope, but just doing more of a deep set style test, no back and forth stuff. No chance for the anchor to get clogged up with sticks and rocks and stuff. Initial pull's 190 pounds. Now we're at 380 pounds. Anchor shank is still just barely visible. Nope, now I think there it just disappeared. Oh, now it reappeared. Now we're at 565 pounds of thrust. Now I think that shank is fully buried. And right around this time, the seabed sort of traps the camera tether. The anchor keeps moving forward, maybe a little faster, and pulls the camera right down into the seabed. Anchor releases. And I'm aware of that, so now I pull the power back to idle. I can tell the anchor has reset, so I increase power again. I'm unaware that the anchor is creeping along at this point. I've got sideways boat motion, there's current. Now I'm up to 760 pounds of thrust. And once again, a trapped camera tether causes the camera to plunge directly downward. Now I'm briefly up to 820 pounds of thrust. That's the max I can pull. So again, at this point, I'm unaware that the anchor is creeping along, so I discontinue the test. Had I known it was still moving, I would have retested this at 5:1 scope. Maybe when I get my sideways boat motion thing ironed out, I'll do just that and retest this anchor. But all that said, it still did very, very well. In fact, this anchor performed better than any other small anchor that I have tested. I've waxed on about how I like the way this anchor's built. It's fully welded. There's no edges for corrosion to fester in. It's got a stainless steel toe that can be resharpened without galvanizing problems. All in all, this is just a phenomenal small anchor. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, anchor safely.